Hey friends, we are here with World Maker Books again. To read some EarthSong Overture. Let me see where I put it. Here we go, by Mark Wandry. Reminder again, we will be giving out some signed copies, and we will start reading at about 5 after. Give people time to get here. I am feeling mostly better. Still not great, but mostly better. Mark is still hacking up along. So, it's been almost 2 weeks of being sick for us. Oh, I'm eating my espresso beans, so hopefully I won't yawn too much. Turn everything else off on this computer. All of a sudden I'm cold. It's getting warm, I guess. Hope it's not too cold where y'all are. It's not too cold here, really. I think it got to about 60 today, which wasn't bad. We're still eating on our leftover turkey because we just cooked it 2 days ago. I'm so excited. Someone actually ordered off of my website. This lady's a good friend of mine and has been for a long time. But it rained all day today, so I couldn't go out and pack her order. So stuff happens. I gotta find my fidget toy here, which is a strange little thing, but it works. It's two little square D-rings on a piece of fabric. It's just something to play with. Because I don't know if a lot of you know, but the reason I knit so much, fidget. Okay, we got about 5 minutes to go. Let's see, this thing can go away. Just gonna put some stuff away, I guess. What the heck, you know. One thing I like about December is that, hey, it's usually nice and chilly. So you get to, cozy up and be warm inside. But a lot of the knitting and crochet pattern people will run knit-alongs or crochet-alongs where there's some mystery to what it is that you're making. And one of the ones that I do most years is by a designer called Imagined Landscapes. And she does... Is it Imagined Landscapes? Anyway, she does a thing called Never Not Gnoming. She's making gnomes all the time. Well, clue 1, a couple days ago, was this little scarf for a gnome. Cute. Today's clue was a cute little hat. So I'm looking forward to... Turn some more light on. There we go. Cute little hat. So I'm looking forward to getting to the rest of the gnome. Remember I said something looked Neapolitan the other day? We got a lot of Neapolitan going on with these colors. And I have red and purple and of course white for the gnome's beard to go in yet. But I don't know what the rest of it's going to look like because the clues haven't been released yet. They're released one a day or thereabouts. You guys, you got to help me. Sabrina cannot stand up. her head is too heavy for her legs. So she consistently leans backwards and falls over. Even when I have her glued with alien tape onto the top of my computer and leaning back against something. So I don't know what to do about her. But she'll probably just fall over again in another 5 minutes. I have a new scent of candle wax burning from Scentsy, because the lady next to me at the last show I did was a Scentsy distributor, and she had one. It's coffee something. Anyway, it smells really good, and it's right here on my desk, right here. Which is dangerous because my desk is kind of messy. So hopefully you won't hear me, freaking out because things are burning on my desk, in the next 40 minutes. We just finished chapter 10. We're ready to start with chapter 11. And I think that's pretty much where we're at. Let me see what happened in 10. The Egyptians. No, I haven't fed them yet because it's not actually time, but you might want to do that because it's time for me to start reading in about 1 minute. The portal that was placed in Egypt had been taken over and everybody and all their equipment sent through by not Egyptians. And the Egyptian government assumes it's the Jewish government. And so who knows? We don't know right now. Those that have already read it know. The way you've written it, it's just an assumption. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and start. It's 5 after. Chapter 11, April 25. Victor's church had grown far faster than he'd thought possible, from a tiny handful of followers to thousands who called themselves his followers. That is the worst sentence ever, Mark.
Thanks.
Sorry. It was mind-numbing. For a time, he managed to happily sleep on a cot in the back of the old theater. That is, until his inner circle felt it was unseemly. They'd rented him a small apartment next door, for next to nothing, actually, and one night he found all his possessions moved there. He could either sleep on the floor in the church or move to the new apartment. Like many leaders before him, he bent to his assistants' wills. On the morning of April 25th, Victor entered the rear offices of the church to find it all but empty. There were morning sermons planned, and they had been talking about dispatching people to the street corners for some good old-fashioned soapbox preaching. Only no one was there. A young member of his church was passing by with some donated food on his way to the pantry. Victor caught him by the arm and received the kind of look you got when you turned up somewhere you weren't supposed to be. What he was about to say died in his throat. "What's up?" he asked instead. "It's just, I thought," the man stammered. Victor was getting extremely worried now. "What is going on?" he demanded, his voice becoming angry. Now the young man was obviously scared. With visible effort, Victor calmed himself with several deep breaths to avoid completely freaking the kid out. "Look, where the fuck everyone be? They said to have you call this number when you came in," he stammered and handed Victor a note. The handwriting was simple and blocky, just like Duke would write. "Tell us when you get this. If you don't get through, keep trying. His will be done." His will be done, Victor thought. Completely forgetting the young man who'd given him the note, he dug the phone out of his pocket and quickly accessed the internet feature. He'd never owned a phone like this before, another luxury his disciples had forced upon him, so it took him a minute to figure out how to get to the local news. "NYC Center of Terrorist Attack again," read one headline. "Oh, Duke, damn, man, what have you done?" He flicked over to the phone and dialed the number. A message alerted him that all circuits were busy. He tried twice more before giving up and running into the kitchen. Grabbing a bagel and a can of Coke, he raced out the back door and into the street. As a homeless drug user, he'd never use a cab. He never had the money to use a cab. He had money now, but didn't like to use it. There were so many other things that required the church's money. Normally, he took the money that his disciples left in his room and dropped it back into the donation tray every day. Today, he hadn't had time to do that yet. Heading south down Manhattan in the cab he'd hailed, he dug out the envelope he'd pocketed without examining earlier. Inside were 5 $20 bills. Such a short time ago, it would have been a nearly inconceivable amount of money. The driver, a Pakistani man by the looks of him, glanced at Victor absently in the rearview mirror as he dialed the number every few blocks. You know we cannot go south of the MLK. I can't eat that right now. Put it over there.
You shook your head yes that you wanted it.
I will eat it when I'm done reading. You guys, I'm giving up pumpkin pie for you. Just FYI. Glanced at Victor absently in the rearview mirror as he dialed the number every few blocks. You know we cannot go south of MLK, the driver said in a thick accent. All traffic has moved to Riverside. Victor hadn't considered the man might know what was going on. What happened? Have you not looked at the news? Victor shook his head. Some terrorists have taken over the Central Park. That place the satellite crashed. The portal, Victor thought. Who did it? The police aren't saying, the driver told him. As they drove south on Broadway, traffic got increasingly worse. By the time they reached 135th Street, it was at a standstill. Victor got out, giving the driver one of the bills and not waiting for the change. Central Park was still half a mile away, so he started walking. Just as the cab driver said, there were roadblocks up at MLK with police diverting traffic west. It wasn't hard for him to get past them. The length of MLK was too broad for officers to effectively stop both car and foot traffic. After a couple more blocks, he started to find closed businesses and more police. He could hear helicopters overhead, and he saw fewer civilians. He ducked into an apartment entrance and dialed yet again. The phone was silent for a moment, then rang. Hello, Victor, Gabriel answered. Gabriel, he snapped, what have you done? The portal to heaven is ours. Chapter break. Mindy woke early, an hour before she'd set her alarm. Central Manhattan was so loud with sirens and honking car horns. It was a testimony to how tired she was that she'd managed to sleep at all. She got up and looked out the window of the tiny hotel room. The Bristol Plaza Hotel wasn't even upscale, and it had still cost her nearly $500 for one night. It was a good thing she'd had the money, because only a few blocks from Central Park, traffic was at a standstill. She'd been far too tired to walk. The nightly rate included a continental breakfast, so Mindy showered, dressed, and repacked her Osprey bag before riding the elevator downstairs to the lobby. There weren't many guests, so she had her pick of danishes, bagels, and coffee. It was a lot better than she would have gotten in Seattle. For some reason, that surprised her. The other guests kept to themselves. They all seemed to be business people. None appeared to be tourists. More importantly, several looked like government types with conservative business suits. With conservative business suits, secure briefcases, and minimal travel bags.
I'm showing it off on it.
They had the look of people who traveled a lot. She caught one woman staring at her out of the corner of her eye, and when she stared back, the other woman didn't look away. It gave her the creeps. While she ate, Mindy used her smartphone, which she'd recharged overnight, to look for information. The media was beside itself with frustration over the lack of news concerning the Central Park terrorist attack. The government had yet to issue a statement with more than the smallest amount of information. So the media was filling that data vacuum with wild speculation. The satellite contained weapons-grade radioactive material, and terrorists wanted it for making bombs. The satellite had aliens on board, and the terrorists were right-wing Christians out to kill the aliens. Her favorite was that there was some gateway to heaven in the park and the government was using it to send an invasion force. When she'd finished her coffee, she went down to the lobby, out of the way, and used her phone to dial Skinner's number. Unlike the night before, it connected right away. "Skinner," the familiar voice answered. "It's Mindy," she said. "Jesus, Mindy, you aren't in New York City, are you?" "Actually, yes," she said. "Are you okay?" His concern sounded genuine, but she had to wonder if it was because he worried about her personally or because she was the only one who could figure out where the portal went. "I'm fine. I got arrested." "What?" She spent a minute explaining her encounter with Detective Harper. "You didn't tell him anything you shouldn't have." "Not a word," she assured him. "What happened in the park?" "I can't explain," he said. "This line isn't secure." She waited while she heard keys tapping, then he spoke again. "I want you to go to this address. The guards will be expecting you." She grabbed a piece of paper and scribbled as he talked. "Once you're there, I'll be in touch." Chapter break. Senior Agent Mark Volant looked out the window of his hospital room in New York Presbyterian Hospital. He could just make out Central Park in the distance. And the constantly circling helicopters. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd gotten precious little sleep last night, coordinating the arrival and dispatch of 10 NSA combat teams. The biggest problem he had was that his agency didn't have hostage rescue teams.
You think bad form?
Yeah, you think? Postnasal drip, it's the bee's knees. Not. Alright, hopefully this will take care of it. The biggest problem he had was that his agency didn't have hostage rescue teams. That wasn't their drill. And he sure didn't want NYPD's team. His assistant had left him with a projector that displayed maps on the wall. They showed thermographic data on the terrorists as they were calling them to the press, and used infrared imagery to show what kind of weapons they had. The crazies had helped themselves to a lot of the Army unit's hardware after they shot the grunts all to hell. They also appeared to have a few people with Army experience, which was unlucky. "There's just no damn way around it," he muttered to the empty room. If they had any chance of retaking the portal camp, it had to be from above. He pulled his tablet computer over, grunting in annoyance at the collection of wires and metal braces that was his left wrist. He used his biometric ID system to log in and began composing an email. And then he was leaving. Another chapter break. All right. Victor squinted in the sweeping spotlight as he slowly climbed out of the filthy drainage culvert. It wasn't the first time he'd been in such a place. As a homeless man, when it got cold in New York City, thousands found refuge in such places. The trouble was that it was spring, and that meant lots of slime and mold. He was filthy from head to toe, but he was in. The first thing he noticed was armed men and women. Many of them he'd seen only yesterday in his church, feeding the hungry, helping the needy. Now they carried guns. Some wore bloody bandages, and all looked excited and afraid. "What have I done?" he thought yet again. It took more than 4 hours to get to the perimeter, time spent avoiding scores of police officers and Army soldiers. "Prophet Victor," a woman greeted him, a machine gun in one hand, her other arm bandaged heavily. Praise the avatars of God, you're here. I am, he said, and moved closer to her. We need to get you to medical care, sister. No, she said. She shook her head. I'm here until kingdom come. We're ready to go to heaven. We've taken the gateway from the warmongers. He wondered how she didn't see the irony in that statement as she stood there wounded and holding a machine gun. Prophet, a young man said, please come with me. Duke said to bring you to him as soon as you arrived. Of course, Victor said, and followed the young man. Chapter break. Dr. George Osgood tried to get comfortable on the floor. What?
Did you get that pie?
No.
Oh, I thought you were chewing something.
No, I'm chewing cookies to keep from gagging on the drainage. Dr. George Osgood tried to get comfortable on the floor. He was old and overweight and had a bad back. It had been years since he'd last sat on the floor for more than a few minutes, and the concrete floor of the little dome was particularly cold and not very smooth. He was hungry, and he had to pee. After the initial orgy of violence, the crazy cultists just watched Osgood and the other scientists. That they were cultists was a guess on his part, but they all had that crazy look cultists get sometimes. They greeted each other with religious epitaphs, and they praised the Lord all the time. What Osgood wished he knew was how they'd managed to beat the army guards and all the agents Volant had. The cultists had caught them flat-footed, he guessed. He figured the government would come to take back the portal before long. He just couldn't figure out how he'd live through the experience. He was about to try to talk to his guard, the big black man with the machine gun, to tell him that he needed to piss, when there was a commotion at the door. Osgood craned his neck to see what it might be. Because he and the dozen technicians who'd been unlucky enough to be in the dome when it fell were in the back, there was a considerable amount of material between where he sat and the door. The black man left, and Osgood entertained the idea of making a run for it for an entire second. Instead, he sat, waited, and listened. Welcome, Victor, his jailer boomed. Duke, Victor said, embracing him, then pushing him back to arm's length. Duke, what have you done? We took the portal to heaven, another man said. Gabriel, Victor said. I assume Mary, Paul, and Cadru are here? Not Cadru, the authoritative voice Gabriel said. She, Mary, and Paul didn't survive the attack. So many lives, Victor said. The apostates had the portal, Duke explained, and thanks to Gabriel, we had an opportunity. We knew you wouldn't agree, Gabriel said. So you simply went against my wishes. No one said anything for a moment. You never explicitly said no, Gabriel said. Osgood heard Victor sigh. We have the portal, Duke said. There was a cheer from the cultists. We can go to heaven whenever we want. Heaven, Osgood sneered. All conversation ceased as every head turned to look at Osgood. He realized a moment too late it would have been better if he'd remained silent. Who are they? Victor asked, moving around some of his people and looking at the men and women in lab coats sitting on the concrete floor. Who cares? Duke said. They were keeping us from the portal. Scientists, Gabriel said, his voice giving the impression that he was partially guessing. Most of the people sitting around Osgood nodded. Osgood was trying to take the measure. Sorry, folks. Osgood was trying to take the measure of the man who was obviously the leader. He was no older than 30, African-American, with a hard-worn edge about him. His clothes, while covered in filth, were new. He wore them with a discomfort you often saw in people who were living above their station. He wondered if this man had started his life on the streets before coming to lead a murderous cult. Who's in charge? Victor asked. I guess that would be me. And you are? Dr. George Osgood. Nuclear physics is my specialty, but I have 5 PhDs in various fields. I head the team studying that device. Device? Victor asked, glancing at the portal. You mean the portal to heaven? Yeah, I heard you the first time. No, I mean that incredible piece of technology over there, capable of creating what we believe is a stable wormhole to another star system. Victor's eyes narrowed, and many of his followers grumbled unhappily. Technology? Victor scoffed. What kind of technology can do that? Sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, Osgood said with a sly grin as he levered himself to his feet. Several of the cultists raised their weapons, but Victor gestured them down. I'm an old scientist and only a danger to your ignorance, he said, even though their movements had caused a stab of fear. They lowered their guns, but continued to watch him warily. Try to imagine taking a modern smartphone back to 1776 and showing it to the Founding Fathers. Do you think they would consider it magic? They were a fairly pious bunch like yourselves, so probably. Franklin might have recognized technology, one of the laser technicians said. Osgood nodded, then shrugged. He had to admit the man could be right there. Still, take that phone back a couple hundred years, and they'd burn you at the stake as a witch. What's your point? Gabriel asked. Osgood had been eyeing him. The one they called Duke was probably ex-military. He had the demeanor and the build. This guy, though, reminded him of Volant in many ways. He had busy, inquisitive eyes and wore a conservative suit minus the tie. There was a military rifle slung over his back, barrel down, and he looked like he knew how to use it. Just that Arthur C. Clarke had a good point, Osgood said, and walked over to the portal. This time, when the guns came up, no one stopped them. Osgood held up his hands in a calming motion as he reached out and touched the bottom step of the dais. Instantly, the portal snapped to life, the symbols dancing around the edge and the forest glade visible on the other side. It was late evening there. The cultists gasped, and many crossed themselves. A few fell to their knees at seeing it for the first time. This is incredibly advanced technology, and you think it's magic. The divine power of God, Victor corrected. On the other side of the portal, Osgood caught a glimpse of a member of the advance team. There were now 8 people on the alien world. The man looked up from something he was doing in the dart and started to wave when he saw the strange men with guns. His eyes grew big and he ran out of view. Good, Osgood thought. That was exactly what he was hoping for. They'd planned to send someone that afternoon, and Colonel Wilson needed to know what had happened in case all these crazies carried the day. Victor seemed a little taken aback by the view. It didn't look like it had when he last looked through the portal. It didn't matter that he was the only one of the followers there to see it. The rest didn't have anything to compare this view to. He spoke while he organized his thoughts. I saw the angel of God deliver that, Victor said, and pointed at the portal. I was not much further away than I am now. So, Osgood said, giving the man another appraising look, you're the one they've been looking for. He chastised himself for not placing the name. Victor Smith, correct? Victor nodded. The police report said you were a junkie. Good to see you turned your life around, at least. Victor gave another nod. That was my life before I saw the miracle. Have you considered that what you saw was aliens and not angels? Aliens? Duke laughed. Like that guy with the wild hair on the TV show is always seeing everywhere? Only these brought us something, Osgood said, turning to look at the portal. The time had expired, and the visible portal disappeared like a fever dream, drifting into nothingness. Your angels are not divine, Victor, but they could be saviors. You need to put your guns down and stop this insanity. We've learned a lot about this device, and we need to learn a lot more before... Osgood swallowed what he'd been about to say, realizing he'd already said far too much. Before what? Gabriel demanded, zooming in on the inadvertent statement. Nothing, Osgood said. Hasn't there been enough loss of life? He moved to step on the dais. Take one more step, and there'll be another lost life, Duke warned, and moved sideways a few feet so none of his cohorts would be in the line of fire. Osgood froze like an Arctic rainfall. Victor spoke to his back. We will swallow up death forever. The sovereign Lord will wipe away the tears from all faces. He will remove his people's disgrace from all the earth. Isaiah 25, 8-12. Osgood turned and glared at him. Get them out of here, Gabriel said, gesturing to several followers. Go put them in that office trailer down by the generator. I can negotiate your surrender, Osgood said, speaking louder as the followers rounded them up and escorted them out under heavy guard. I can guarantee your safety. Don't be an idiot, he yelled as he was herded away. That quote was amazing, Duke said. It was the only one that came to mind, Victor replied. How many faithful are here? Victor asked. We have almost 100 inside, Gabriel said. That's it? Where are the others? We lost 50 in the assault. Another 200 are outside helping create distractions. We've heard from at least that many more, but the police and the army have us hemmed in. We can't just leave them here, Victor said. The military will hunt them down like dogs. He went over and knelt next to the dais. Slowly, like he was touching something that might be dangerously hot, he reached out a hand and ever so gently touched it. Just like it had for the scientist, the portal sprang into life. On the other side stood a man in camouflage military fatigues, a rifle over his shoulder and a pistol on his belt. Victor could just make out the name on his uniform, Lieutenant Colonel Wilson. Besides, he continued, turning to see his followers glaring at the man on the other side, there appear to be some serpents in the garden waiting for us. We'll need all our followers to be sure we can clear out the non-believers. Surely God won't deny us paradise, Duke said, coming up behind Victor to look at the man on the other side. We can hope, Victor said, but who can know God's will? Maybe this is our final test. They watched for a few minutes, facing off over the inconceivable distance, until the portal once again disappeared. Work on getting the rest of our people in here, he ordered. I don't approve of what you did, but what's done is done. You can answer to God for that once we're before his shining throne. Now, we need to get as many of the followers here as possible, and we'll all go through to heaven together. As you wish, Duke said, and bowed his head. His remaining disciples went to see what they could do, leaving Victor alone to look at the swirling patterns of light within the portal. Heaven was so close at hand. Still, his thoughts couldn't help but circle back to what Osgood had said, and a tiny seed of doubt found purchase in the ripe field of his mind. Chapter break. The U.S. Army private looked at Mindy's ID and then back at her with that dubious look someone gives an obviously underage person trying to buy alcohol. She sighed and explained again. Have someone check the NASA priority list, she said. I should be on it. Ma'am, the private began once more. I have the list issued when I came on duty. You aren't on it, and this isn't a NASA-issued ID. As I explained, Private, my name was only added 2 hours ago. I came on duty 9 hours ago, he said, and that would be why you don't see my name. I don't have a NASA ID because I'm a civilian. I'm sorry, you aren't on the list. Mindy reached up and massaged her temples. It was almost an hour later before Mindy managed to see someone who was willing to do a live check of the cleared list. As Leo Skinner had promised, her name was on it. Once they cleared her, though, no one knew what to do with her. She had the second highest level of clearance, meaning she had access to the portal itself, but they didn't currently control the portal. They were operating out of a commandeered convenience store 3 blocks from Central Park and didn't really have anywhere to put her. I don't suppose you can come back tomorrow? Asked an obviously overworked lieutenant after a sergeant passed her off to him. Lieutenant, I went through hell getting here. I'd rather not leave. Though he was not happy about it, he found a place for her to sit at the back of the command center. She sat on a dusty case of Fruitopia bottles and watched. It turned out to be a dream come true for getting up to speed with what happened. In less than an hour, her fly-on-the-wall position allowed her to fill in all the gaps. Drones are ready to go in, someone said, and all heads turned in that direction. Despite the crowded conditions, they had installed a portable control console, complete with a pair of monitors, on top of the store's counter. They had piled all the tiny flashlights, snacks, and vaping supplies in a corner to make room for the equipment. Mindy had no experience with drones aside from what she'd seen on TV and movies. Watching through the monitors only gave her a view from the drones. They were somewhere up in a tall building. As she observed, she got a few flashes of the soldiers around them as they picked up the drones, activated them, and tossed them off the buildings. It turned out there were 2 types. One was a small airplane-like drone that used a high-tech internal electric turbine. Its wide, transparent wings allowed it to soar almost silently. The other was a multi-bladed little drone designed for use in dense foliage and close to the ground. We have eyes yet? Mindy turned toward the voice and saw a large man dressed in a cheap suit, sunglasses on his face, and a cast on his left wrist. Coming up now, Agent Volant, an Army captain said. Plat out as many of their positions as you can, Volant said. I have more agents arriving by 3 this afternoon. As the drones moved around and the military specialists plotted the cultist locations, it quickly became clear that there were a lot of them and they were using military hardware. A drone operator pointed out a trio of men in street clothes learning how to operate an M2 50 caliber machine gun. That guy is ex-military, a lieutenant said, pointing to a tall black man instructing the others. What the fuck did you guys have 50 calibers there for? Boland asked. Contingency, the captain said under his breath. Yeah, well, your contingency is now pointed at us. Boland read a report and tossed it onto a pile. There are more reports than cultists keep trying to get into the park. Your soldiers need to make damn sure none of them do. He pointed a finger at the captain. The last thing we need is reinforcement in there. We're on shaky ground as it is, the military man pointed out. Sooner or later, the press is going to start screaming posse comitatus. We'll deal with that, Boland replied. Use the damn cops where you can. I'll be next door. Send me their force assessment as soon as it's done. He left without another word. What an asshole, the lieutenant who let Mindy in said. The captain nodded. Chapter break. Volant walked down 2 doors into what had been a barbershop before becoming his temporary command center. As he walked, he dry swallowed a pair of painkillers. His wrist hurt like a motherfucker. Several of his remaining agents were there, busily setting up equipment and taking intelligence reports from other teams around the park. Itch, itch, itch. Okay, the call to the director about the losses had been a difficult one. You never told a man like that about how you had your pants ripped down and your ass tanned. What surprised him was that there were no recriminations, only an insistence that they retake the portal no matter what. They weren't worrying about publicity or other fallout. That meant the situation was worse than they had originally told him. Is the teleconference ready? He asked the junior agent. We're ready to dial in, the man replied. Boland sat and gestured toward the monitor with his head to begin. He wished he'd taken his pill several minutes earlier as the director of the FBI appeared. Section Director Volant, the man said, you've got quite a situation there. Yes, sir, he replied. I understand my director has briefed you? Completely. I suspect you are about to ask for help from the Bureau? My people could do a direct assault, but the cultists are dug in pretty well, and they have hostages, including a scientist we'd like to avoid getting shot full of holes. The FBI man waited. Volant sighed and asked for what he'd hoped to avoid asking for. After night had fallen over Manhattan, the police received instructions to push back the perimeter as far from the park as they could. The mayor and police chief complained loudly, but the governor overrode their complaints without providing an explanation why. The chief went on record complaining about the action, considering the department had lost 14 officers already in the initial attack, but eventually he complied. Officials had kept the airspace over the city restricted since 2001. Its lights out, no one noticed the aircraft that crossed the island's airspace 15,000 feet high or the 24 tiny figures that fell away as it passed. The fact the airborne component of the HRT existed wasn't public knowledge. Assembled shortly after September 11th, the unit was operational by 2005. Composed entirely of jump-qualified, experienced veterans from the Navy SEALs, SOCOM, and other special operation units, they were an arrow in the quiver the FBI hoped they'd never have to use, despite the millions they spent every year maintaining it. Volant had been more than a little surprised to learn they existed, and even more so that they were in a hangar at Langley with a converted C-130 warmed up and ready to go. The whole situation stank to high heaven, and he still gave them the green light. The men plummeted through the dark skies for 10,000 feet in nearly complete silence, their black uniforms and darkened equipment invisible from below. Computers on their wrists, carefully calibrated, triggered their chutes at precisely 2,000 feet above sea level. As the chutes opened, they were over the Hudson River. Once they deployed their chutes, the team took control of their MFF ARAPs, military freefall advanced ram air parachute systems, and quickly set their courses due east. Each team member had both an advanced GPS as well as a team tracker to keep position on the others. 5 minutes after jumping out of the C-130, the team was skimming the tops of the trees in Central Park West, like a flight of bats. Quiet as death, they accelerated the rate of descent. A pair of followers watching the trail near the incident looked up at the sound, and the 10mm rounds from 2 suppressed MP-510A3 machine guns blew out the backs of their heads with as little noise as their bodies hitting the ground. The team sat down in pairs at a dozen places around the perimeter of the portal camp. They quickly rolled up their chutes and secured them under anything handy as they watched each other's backs. The followers were still unaware anything was happening. Duke hadn't warned them to watch the skies as well as the ground. Owing to hundreds of hours practicing, the team was ready for action less than 30 seconds after touching boots to grass. Echo team to control, the HRT leader called in a stage whisper over his radio. Control, go, Volant replied from a few blocks away. We're on the ground, 2 tangos down from landing, no sign of incursion detection. Noted, Volant said. Wait for coordination. He turned his attention to the NSA operations coordinator. Are the teams in position? Standing by, was the reply. Volant looked over the IR camera views from the fleet of drones now hovering in and around the park. HRT, you are a go. While Volant verified everything was ready, each member of the HRT selected targets through the night vision gear attached to their helmets, obtaining perfect sight pictures. At the word from Volant, 24 weapons fired as one, and 24 followers fell. Go, 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 the HRT leader said, and his men walked in low crouches toward their objectives. They moved like a wave, coordinated and single shots as they advanced. Chapter break. Victor sat with his remaining disciples next to a table covered with strange scientific instruments. A large tourist map of Central Park dominated the space, laid out unevenly because of the other items. There were dozens of little marks on the map showing where followers had spotted patrols or guards. Victor couldn't think of them as enemies. They were police and army, fellow countrymen. Not some random faceless enemy. You think that's the way? Victor asked, pointing to a series of stormwater culverts north of the meadow. Yes, Duke said. It's like how we got you in, only a longer route. They're watching the other way now. Gabriel nodded, figure we can get through in a huge wave. It's probably the best option, Gabriel said with a shrug. We think we can get most of the faithful through and then rush into the portal. Victor nodded. A shot rang out, making Victor jump. Gabriel and Duke turned toward the sound and reached for weapons. Nerves? Gabriel wondered. An instant later, there was a yell and a stream of ragged gunfire. No, Duke snarled and rushed toward the door. Call in the patrols, he yelled over his shoulder. Protect the portal. Gabriel grabbed his radio and shouted orders as the sporadic gunfire quickly grew in intensity. Victor jumped as a round wanged off the concrete dome over his head. Victor, Gabriel said, dropping the radio into his pocket and scooping up a rifle. Go through to heaven. No, Victor shook his head. Not without everyone else. Gunfire rose to the roar of battle. Rounds were bouncing off the concrete dome every few seconds now. Gabriel snarled and grabbed Victor by the arm, trying to push him bodily toward the portal. Victor violently shook him off, making Gabriel glare at him. Go help the faithful, Victor snapped. Gabriel seemed to consider for a second, then turned and ran out of the portal dome. All right, this is another chapter break. We're going to go one more. At the same time as the FBI's HRT was engaging the inner defenses and sweeping toward the dome, 50 NSA agents under Volant's command attacked in 5 groups of 10, hitting the followers' outer defenses. The followers tasked with defense were mostly everyday civilian vets or people with shooting experience mixed in evenly at Duke's discretion. The HRT members picked the able members and eliminated them first. As the HRT fought inward, the NSA teams moved up behind them. The result was complete confusion among the followers and more than a few instances of panic-induced fratricide. As Duke took temporary cover behind a crate just outside the entrance, he evaluated the order of battle and instantly recognized the rapidly deteriorating situation. The followers were either trying to stand in the open and fight, were mowed down easily, or were running. Machine guns. Both of the men who knew how to operate it were dead with clean headshots. Without a moment's hesitation, Duke jumped up and ran. He spotted 2 dark figures to his left as he got up, the ground near his feet flying up from bullet impacts. Oh my gosh. He spotted 2 dark figures to his left as he got up, the ground near his feet flying up from bullet impacts. He swung the rifle he'd held crossbody, flicked the selector to full auto, and emptied the magazine in one long, sustained burst. Both figures spun away, leaving him uncertain if he'd hit either of them. Get in the dome, he yelled at the followers running by. A few listened, most didn't. Duke leapt up onto the gun mount just as a bullet pierced his thigh. Ah! He growled at the explosion of pain. Another hit him in the side, and he felt his ribs crack. Motherfucker, he spat as he wrenched around the gun and yanked back the huge charging handle, feeding one of the massive rounds into the chamber. He felt another bullet pierce his lower leg, and he screamed viscerally as he swung the gun in the direction of the gunfire, grabbed the handles in both hands, and jabbed the butterfly trigger with both thumbs. The huge gun roared as it chugged out a stream of 700 grain bullets. The explosion of the gunfire was like ice picks driven into Duke's ears. In moments, he was painfully deaf. Though the HRT guns had suppressors, Duke could still see flashes from the weapons, and he worked the gun across the edge of the clearing, tearing through abandoned trucks and a shelter set up for personnel. The rounds made 2 small trees explode, killing the FBI agents taking shelter behind them. More fire came at him from the other side, 2 more rounds hitting him in the back. He screamed and swung the weapon around, heedless of who or what the bullets were chewing up as the gun traversed. He caught the movement of a pair of dark-clad men diving behind a Connex-style shipping container. He tracked into and through it. The thick steel nearly exploded under the fusillade of bullets. They hit him again and again and still again, but he never stopped firing. The M2, or Ma Deuce as many gunners affectionately called it, fired almost 600 rounds a minute. Attached to the gun was a full case of 840 rounds. Duke was almost 3/4 of the way through the can, the barrel beginning to glow a cherry red, when a round punched through his neck. Blood fountained, and Duke fell to his knees, still not releasing the trigger. The barrel tracked upwards, and bullets stitched up the side of an apartment building 1/4 of a mile away. Duke tried to bring the gun back down, but it was hard to move. The pain was gone now. He couldn't decide if it was the spray of blood from his neck or his head swimming from the injuries. He didn't hurt at all. A high-powered rifle round fired by an NSA sniper a half-mile away took the top of his head off. Chapter break. The next one's not too big. When Duke fired the .50 caliber, Victor thought his head had exploded. Even through the concrete of the dome, the thunderous roar of the gun felt like someone was physically smashing him in the side of the head with each shot. He screamed and smashed his hands into his ears as hard as he could. He didn't know how he ended up on the floor next to the portal, his face pressed against the cool concrete, screaming at the never-ending assault. Then, as suddenly as it started, it ended. Victor rose to his knees and looked at the dome's doorway just as Gabriel staggered in. Victor got to his feet, realizing he'd never been happier to see anyone in his life. Only to realize the older man was bleeding and could barely stand. "Gabriel!" he yelled. "Victor!" Gabriel gasped, one hand holding a pistol, the other covering a massive wound in his side. "Get through the portal!" "Where is everyone?" Victor demanded, taking half a step toward his disciple. "Gone," Gabriel said. He leaned against the edge of the door. "Everyone's gone. There are government agents everywhere. You have to..." He never finished what he was going to say, as several bullets tore through his chest and killed him instantly. As Gabriel fell, the pistol he'd been holding flew from his grasp, bouncing across the floor to land at Victor's feet. Victor reached down and picked it up without considering the action. It was surprisingly heavy in his hand, warm and sticky with blood. He looked from the gun to Gabriel's body, then out through the door where a pair of black-clad men were pointing compact machine guns at him. He raised his hands to show he was no threat, but unfortunately he was still holding the gun. The bullet punched through his solar plexus, knocking the breath from him and pushing him backwards, where he tripped on the bottom step of the portal dais. He fell, surprised but not feeling any pain yet. The portal instantly sprang to life, and the second shot, meant to hit him in the forehead, missed by a fraction of an inch and flashed as it bounced off the impenetrable portal's glowing side. Victor dropped his pistol and tried to take a breath, only to find he couldn't. The bullet had shredded his diaphragm. He looked down and saw a spreading redness on his shirt. "I'm shot," he realized. "They shot me." He rolled over to his hands and knees, and the pain hit him like a tidal wave. He tried breathing again, looked down, and saw blood pouring from his stomach. Above him, the portal glowed. It was evening in heaven, and he could just see a moon shining over the trees. It didn't look like the moon he recognized. Dr. Osgood's words came back to him. "Have you even considered that what you saw were aliens and not angels?" "Aliens," he said. the tiny amount of air he had remaining making the word come out as a mere croak. He crawled up the steps to within feet of the portal's shimmering face. A woman came into view, wearing camouflage like the man he'd seen before. She looked at him kneeling there in the harsh artificial light of the dome, blood pouring out of him, and her eyes went wide. He still couldn't breathe, and he was starting to feel dizzy as he struggled to his feet, his blood making the surface of the dais as slippery as glass. The woman covered her mouth with one hand and reached out to him with the other. "Stop!" someone yelled behind Victor in a strong, authoritative voice. "Hands up! Do not move!" Victor heard the words, but his brain, oxygen-starved and suffering from blood loss, didn't put a meaning to them. He took an unsteady step forward. He reached out, and 2 more bullets tore through his chest from behind, pitching him forward into the other world. He rolled over slowly, pain washing away his entire existence, and looked up as the woman he'd seen looked down at him. "Heaven," he managed to whisper. She stared at him in shock and confusion. Victor struggled for one more breath and then died. All right, chapter break, and we're going to stop there. I've got some pumpkin pie waiting for me. Yay. We will take up here again next time. And if you liked what we've been doing, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel and share with your friends. Thanks. Bye.